Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Yeah,
I can explain it while it's being passed out. It's fairly simple. This amendment would add budget oversight to the federal stimulus funds should they be expended. If we are in session, it would go through our budget process. If we are not in session, it would go through the State Finance Council for approval. And I'll stand for questions on the amendment.
Senator Pittman.
I just question why would we want to have this oversight that would be exclusive to federal stimulus money versus the normal process? Why would we introduce this on this particular aspect of the funding?
You know, during the budget process, state funds and even federal funds are approved through our budget process. When they are granted outside of the legislature being in session, it's typically a reverse, as in we do it after the fact. So this would just simply put eyes on it beforehand. And we do this with several other bills. You may have seen legislation run through that has these types of amendments on them that require State Finance Council approval when out of session, which is really the primary goal here. Their anticipation is that they'll receive these funds while we're out of session and need to expend them in a certain period of time. That allows for the State Finance Council then to come into effect. Should they receive them during a legislative session, then we would not want to rely on the State Finance Council, and instead they could just simply go through the normal budget process.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand the oversight piece, but will that delay any of their ability to expend those funds in a timely manner?
Yeah, like I said, usually they have a deadline on them, but that deadline's like end of calendar year, end of fiscal year. So we would always be able to have that addressed prior to those deadlines. It's never, you have 30 days. It's nothing like that.
Senator Pittman.
In general, I approve the oversight, obviously, but I think I'm going to go ahead and vote for this, but I think that it's an unnecessary step in this circumstance. I think that the Department of Transportation is very good, and they've gone through and prioritized a lot of this stuff, but I'll go ahead and support this amendment.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for the Senator from Saline. Have you run this by the Secretary of Transportation? Does she see this as potentially delaying any projects or activity?
We spoke with the Deputy Secretary regarding this. I assume she was speaking for the agency, and no, there's no problem with the timelines on this.
Chairman.
Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking at the amendment. Does the senator from Saline, I mean, is it his intent to give, under the Finance Council, the governor does have, if she does not vote for something, it's vetoed. I mean, you realize, do you understand those guidelines that you're giving?
Sure, and it'd be just the same as the budget process. The governor has a veto or even a line item veto through the budget process, so it wouldn't really have a
It's
huge...
not, with all due respect, I don't believe it's the same because in the legislature, we have an opportunity to override that veto. Finance Council basically doesn't have that option right now currently. I don't know whether that'll be addressed with KEMA or not, but
So this would be to expend funds.
right.
It would then stop that expending of funds should the governor veto the Appropriation Act.
I'm tempted to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to divide this amendment. I like given the legislature oversight. I'm not sure about the State Finance Council, but anyway, that's just some of my concerns. Thank you.
Committee, further questions? Ready for a motion? Oh, Senator Hawk.
And I'm sorry, a question for the Senator from Saline. In terms of how this might operate, so this could potentially happen, let's just say some of that money came through in May and we're getting ready for sine die. I assume we would have to have a separate appropriation bill to do this since we may have already passed the budget, or are you seeing this as existing omnibus budget bill? How do you see this process?
I think we would just put a proviso in conference if that's what was happening.
Senator Pittman? Well, I'd look for a motion on this. Senator Clays?
Oh, I would move my amendment.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Bowers. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Amendment is adopted. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Senator from Saline.
There are no further amendments. I move that we pass out Senate Bill 116 favorably as amended.
Seconded by Senator Pittman. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, same sign. Bill is on its way to the floor. Thank you, Senator from Saline, for volunteering to carry this bill. Appreciate that. We will now turn our attention to open the hearing on Senate Bill 19. Adam, can you give us a briefing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 19 designates a portion of U.S. Highway 77 from the western city limits, the city of Blue Rapids, then heading west to the eastern city limits of the city of Waterville in Marshall County. And this road would be designated as the Corporal Allen E. Oatney and the SP4 Gene A. Myers Memorial Highway. In order to name this section of highway, the current named highway, the Prairie Parkway, would be unnamed for this particular section. Lastly, the secretary would install the signs once the cost requirements were fulfilled. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Adam, is this bill identical to the one that passed the Senate last year, like 38-0?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Okay, we'll turn our attention to the proponents. Senator Bowers, if it's all right, Representative Mosier has another meeting. Could we let her go first? Representative Mosier, welcome to the Transportation Committee.
Chairman Peterson, Vice Chairman Clays, Ranking Minority Leader Hawk, and members of the Senate Transportation Committee. I am Lisa Mosier, State Representative for House District 106 and resident of Marshall County, where the referenced highway naming venture in Senate Bill 19 will be realized. I testify today in support of Senate Bill 19, designating a portion of United States Highway 77 between Blue Rapids and Waterville to the honor of two local Vietnam veterans, Corporal Allen E. Oatney and Specialist 4th Class Gene A. Myers. I developed at a young age an appreciation for our nation's veterans and the price paid for freedom. My uncle and godfather was a World War II veteran. Two of the 627 Kansas military lives lost in the Vietnam War were those of U.S. Corporal Allen E. Oatney of Waterville, Kansas, killed in action in Cambodia on June 22, 1970, and U.S. Army Specialist 4th Class Gene Allen Myers, also of Waterville, Kansas, killed in action in South Vietnam on June 9, 1969. Senate Bill 19 commits to the honor of these young men a 5-mile segment of U.S. Highway 77 between Waterville and Blue Rapids, Kansas. I believe this tribute deserves the support of this body. Funding for signs marking the referenced section of highway will be provided by the American Legion through private donations. We must not forget the sacrifice of more than 50,000 heroes of the Vietnam War, and specifically the sacrifice of these two young men from rural Kansas who gave their lives in answer to their country's call to duty. Their commitment to God and country is evident by the price they paid. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, questions for Representative Mosier? Seeing none, thank you. Next up, we have Senator Bowers. You can do it from your seat if you would like, or you can go to the podium.
Well, good morning, and That was Representative Mosier's first time testifying, and great job. So you have seen this bill before, those of us who have been on the committee. We passed it out last year, 38-0 on the consent calendar, February 18th. Had a hearing in the House Transportation Committee where it didn't get sent out. So it's been around a few years. In fact, in 2019, the former Representative Bill Panbacker and myself received a letter, and I'll introduce my friends behind me here, and from the two American Legions working together from Blue Rapids and Waterville. And this was their idea to rename this 5-mile stretch. And they'll also chat with you about the funds that they've raised already. So everything is good to go on that end too. We do recognize that this is a carve out of the Prairie Parkway, which Adam mentioned. I did have research done on that for my intern last year, if you'd like to see. That was done in 1967. I do want to call your attention to the new testimony, and this is from David Blatt from Pineville, Pennsylvania, and how he has a memory from 52 years ago. I'd like you to read over that sometime, but it sure is testimony to Gene Myers, one of the fellows, about his leadership. I can imagine a redheaded freckle boy from Kansas taking these young people underneath his wing and teaching him what they needed to know, and he was the first up and the first killed in that battle. So if you read through that, that's pretty moving too. I believe that's everything I would like to tell you, because I'd like to have you hear from my friends from Marshall County, Jerry and Janet, and they'll tell you about their plans, how they're working locally, and everything they have set ready to go. Just need our permission. I think this is a simple consent bill again, and with a few more caveats in here that is moving as well. So if it's all right, unless there's any questions for me, I'll probably let the folks behind me take over.
Seeing no questions, thank you. Next up we have is Jerry and Janet Zayas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having the opportunity to come and talk to you again. My name is Jerry Zayas. I'm a retired colonel from the United States Army, military academy class of 1980, and recently moved up to Blue Rapids, Kansas, so I could be a babysitter for my granddaughter. But in that capacity, I decided to run for mayor, and I'm the mayor of the town of Blue Rapids. But more importantly, right now, I am the post service officer for Post 169. And during this process, it was a while back, we got the veterans together, and we were concerned about naming of things, and how do we remember veterans? And obviously, the first one for us was Corporal Alan Oatney, who happens to be memorialized in Valley Heights High School with a plaque there, and his brother, we see every day, Jim Oatney. The other thing that's not noted about Alan Oatney, he did have a son that he never met, Toby, who lives in Marysville, and we see him all the time. And sometimes it's very hard for us veterans to relate to what they're going through. But in this process, the initial thing was to name the highway the Alan Oatney, Corporal Alan Oatney. And all of a sudden, we end up talking to Donna Wilson, and she goes, well, what happened to my cousin? Specialist for Gene Myers. And he was from Waterville, but he got lost in the shuffle because his parents moved to St. Mary's, and that's his home of record when he was killed in Vietnam. But it really brought it to our attention that we needed to let our posterity know the sacrifices that these two young men gave for their country, because a lot of that gets lost in the shuffle, lost with the current events. And we received the endorsement of the school district and the county commissioners and the citizens. We have already raised, I would say, over about $10,000 through different events that we've been hosting, thanks to the Legion Riders, the Patriot Guards, and all them to come help us, so that we don't forget And I will tell you, the reason I'm here is Roger Edwards, the commander that's written that letter to you. He's a Vietnam vet with the Marine Corps, infantryman. He can't make it because of COVID. We lost one member of our post because of COVID. And actually, 2 days before he died, I'm the service officer, and we sent him for a appointment, and that's where they found his temperature and all that other stuff, and he passed away, and it was pretty hard. And John Argenbright, he's also Vietnam veteran, and he can hardly walk. He has a hard time. So with all that, I would like to say this is important to the city of Blue Rapids, to the citizens there, to the citizens of Waterville, and if I may, to the citizens of Marshall County, because we will never forget the sacrifice that they made. And, you know, when I talk to Jim and Toby, I'm always reminded of that sacrifice. And Jim was here last year, and he had a hard time coming, and he couldn't come this time because of the pain of losing his brother. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for the time and invite you all to come to Blue Rapids sometime. I would like to introduce my wife, Janet Zayas. She's also a member of American Legion Post 169. She's a Army and Air Force veteran, but she would like to say a few words too.
Welcome to the committee, Janet.
Good morning, committee members. This is not the first time you've entertained us, and so I will be brief and only emphasize some key points. We all have somewhat different viewpoints on things, and so I bring a little twist to what maybe the male members of the Legion bring. 51 years have passed now. Most of our Legion members are Vietnam-era veterans. We can all agree that it was an egregious war, and the treatment of returning service members was as well. They did not receive the support or gratitude from our people at home, as was the norm of previous wars. The current generation does not have any idea what our service members endured in Vietnam or when arriving home. We must remember so as not to be caught in such a debacle again. Humans have short memories and need to be reminded. Naming this highway creates an opportunity for our communities to inform and remind the current generation of the true cost of their freedoms. It is no coincidence that this highway passes in front of our unified high school, where we have both Waterville and Blue Rapids students. I am a post-Vietnam era veteran, and I want to help right the wrong I saw done to those back then. I want my grandchildren and the community's children to value the service of every veteran and be willing to serve if need be. I want Blue Rapids, Waterville, and the state of Kansas to be known for producing good service members, supporting service members, and caring for veterans. We have done our part with this endeavor, and now we are asking the state to stand with us and pass the necessary bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for your time and support of our Kansas veteran and our future generations.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for the Zayas? Senator Pittman.
I just wanted to thank both of you for coming up in person. I know that it's a big journey, especially during COVID. It's too bad the other individuals couldn't be here. I know it's a challenge, and I remember last year, it was very touching to hear the stories of these two individuals. So thanks for advocating for our veterans.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, is there any other proponents? Any opponents? Any neutrals? We'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 19. It is our intention to work that bill tomorrow. We'll get that moving towards the floor. We'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 131. Adam, can you give us a briefing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 131 provides for the regulation of funeral processions. It also creates a new traffic infraction for vehicles that do not properly yield to funeral processions, excuse me. Under the bill, Section 1 would define funeral procession, a funeral lead vehicle, and a funeral escort. Funeral lead vehicles are allowed under current law to equip flashing headlamps when a vehicle is serving as a funeral lead vehicle. Section 2 would create a new violation whereby a pedestrian or vehicle shall yield a right-of-way to funeral processions when that procession is being escorted by a funeral lead vehicle or funeral escort. Violation would be a penalty of $20 for failure to yield the right-of-way. Section B would allow funeral processions to go through intersections when the funeral lead vehicle proceeds, regardless of the traffic signals or right-of-way provisions. However, funeral processions must yield to authorized emergency vehicles with lights and sirens on. They must yield when instructed by the police. They must exercise due care to avoid collisions. And they must stay within 300 feet of the next car in the procession to proceed through an intersection. Section 3 of the bill requires that processions to follow closely to other vehicles as is practical and safe. Under current state law, drivers must maintain a safe distance. However, this will not apply to funeral processions. Section 3 also requires that funeral procession vehicles display lighted headlamps, tail lights, or flashing hazard lights if the vehicles are so equipped. Lastly, Section 4 provides that cities and counties may require a funeral procession notification to law enforcement. And further, the section allows a city or county to adopt regulations that are not in conflict with these statutory provisions. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Adam? Seeing none, thank you. First up, we have Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. I really appreciate you having this hearing. I introduced this last session, and it did pass out of the House Transportation Committee unanimously. It was slightly different. I'll explain the difference here in a second. What this the generation of this was basically when my uncle passed away. He was a Vietnam veteran, and my family went out to the National Cemetery, and I can't tell you how much it means to have the Patriot Guard or the VFW Riders or some of these other military organizations come in and escort the family in these situations. Take care of the traffic. This was in actually Nashville, and take us through the highway aspects and make sure that the procession proceeded smoothly. It was touching, and I've known about the riders and I've worked with them in Leavenworth because we have 2 national cemeteries there for a long time. But there's something different when you are inside of that grieving moment as a family member and realize these people are stepping up. And so I came back to look at our statutes in regard to funeral processions and maybe put some protections in for these Patriot Guard riders who come out and do this service for free, just to honor our veterans that have come home. And I realized after some research, working with the revisers, that Kansas, unlike 33 other states, doesn't actually recognize funeral processions as a statutory thing, which surprised me. And so working on some of this language, basically I went about saying, oh, let's recognize that funeral processions are a thing, and at least at a minimum, allow the cars that are inside the procession to proceed through, say, stop signs, stop lights, if they're actually doing so in a legal fashion in terms of directing traffic and having an escort. That's a minimum, so that if somebody gets hit in an intersection, the insurance company won't say they're breaking the law. These riders do a lot. The funeral escorts do a lot. I worked with the municipalities. I wanted to make sure that they could come in and legislate or make regulations, and they'll speak to that, I think. This is an important bill. Now, what's different than the House bill is previously I had in here a section that would actually make it a traffic violation not to pull over on the side of the road. And that caused some heartburn with some of the House leadership, so I've taken that out of this particular bill. That's still inside of the House bill. House Bill, I believe it's 2107. So that's a key difference in what we have here in front of us versus what's in the House. That one in the House has already passed out of committee unanimously. I think that important to pass this out. I'm going to urge the chair to work this tomorrow. I don't know if we're going to do that or not. But it's important because it shows that we in the Senate have a position on this, and I think this will be more palatable to the House leadership to actually allow it to go to the floor. And this would allow us to have this actually, at a minimum, recognize this for the safety of the riders, safety of the procession. So with that, I'll stand for questions, or I can yield my time over to the people here to speak to this.
Committee questions, Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you just give a little more dialogue on the reason that was taken out of the House bill, the piece about yielding?
Yes, you know, the committee wants it in the House. I was over there giving testimony, but when I went to the House leadership last year, for whatever reason, they didn't like the idea that we're going to give tickets to the folks that are not yielding and pulling over the side of the road. So I said, let's see if we can get this through by taking that piece out. I can't tell you why they have heartburn with it.
I think that would be a great piece to keep in personally.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. Where were you raised?
Here in Leavenworth?
That's surprising to me. I know that we were very respectful about funerals throughout the state.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we would need to legislate good behavior when we already have it.
It's a very good point. Why would we want to legislate behavior? This is merely recognizing that we have funeral processions and statutes, and really it's about giving protections to those that are in it that make it legal for us to go through, as you've been through many funerals, I know I have, when we have to go through stoplights and things like that, it's technically not recognized as a thing as being legal. So this is just putting a formal process in that says, hey, this is a thing that happens in Kansas, and we recognize it and respect the fact that funeral processions are going to go, and the riders are going to have the right to direct traffic in those limited circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because of my past in law enforcement as a chaplain and hospice, nearly 20 years combined, I've been to hundreds of funerals, processions. Unfortunately, many people don't respect the laws. Many accidents as a result, and I think this is a good thing. And, I appreciate you bringing it forward. Thank you.
Any further? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Pittman. I'm looking at what Adam put in his brief about Section 2 and the penalty, and then I'm looking at your testimony in the bill. So that's not in there. I just wanted to be sure. The $20.
The yield when one is going through an intersection and things like that, I mean, they have to yield the way, but they don't have to pull over on the side of the road.
So
There's no.
So that fine is in your bill.
I'm sorry, Senator, I missed Adam Severs. Doing something late at night and copying I accidentally copied the version on the House side without I wasn't the drafter of this one. So that Section 2 is incorrect for this bill. I didn't pick up on the fact that the fine is not included in this bill. But while it's on the House side, there is no violation or fine included in this bill. So I'll send out a new bill write-up, but my bill write-up is incorrect.
Thank you. And one follow-up quick question. You did talk in your testimony about technically if we didn't have this bill, if there was an accident, a person could be found guilty of running a stop sign or a stoplight, et cetera.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Any further questions for Senator Pittman? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We'll turn our to next proponent, Pam Scott, Executive Director of Kansas Funerals Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. I am here on behalf of the Kansas Funeral Directors Association. And throughout history, people have shown their respect for the dead by pulling over and giving the family a peaceful and uninterrupted visit to the cemetery. Kansas does have no comprehensive laws, which creates problems. It's on a city-by-city or county-by-county basis usually. If there is any law whatsoever, there's no consistency, and this provides confusion to the public when a lot of people don't know what the rules are right now. Probably the most troublesome area in the state is the Johnson County area where, there's 20 cities in Johnson County, and a procession may go through, 4 or 5 of them that have different rules. So there have actually been some escorts pulled over in some areas of Johnson County, especially on their way to the National Cemetery in Leavenworth. We believe a uniform funeral procession law would improve the safety of funeral processions by setting forth clear rules that both the public and funeral directors have to follow. I think also a more important part is it would provide education to the public on the rules concerning funeral processions. A lot of people don't know what to do when a funeral procession goes by, what the rules are. And if a comprehensive law was passed, something could be put into the state Kansas driver's license handbook that's given to drivers, when you initially get your license, taking a test. But information concerning funeral processions and what the rules are would be put in there, and therefore the public could be better educated on what they are supposed to do. So we do support the bill. We hope you will help support it also and help us continue the practice of honoring the dead through funeral processions. Thank you.
Committee questions? See none, thank you. I have listed under testimony a Lynn Rolfe on WebEx, but I do not see him on WebEx. Is he in the room? Not seeing anyone. Note that we have written testimony from Ed Klump, Deborah Barnes, and a whole list of other folks, including the Patriot Guard Riders and Alan Barnes, a DFW service officer. Are there any further proponents in the room wanting to speak?
Mr. Chair, I know that we have 2 folks, Bruce Holmes, who gave written testimony, who's here to speak, as well as Ron Myrtle, who are here to speak in the back of the room here.
We have time for some brief testimony if you'd like to approach. When you get to the microphone, just please state your name and who you're with. We are short on time now.
I won't take long. My name is Bruce Holmes, Holmes, and I'm the state captain for the Patriot Guard Riders in Kansas. So we're divided by state, and I'm in charge of the state of Kansas as far as Patriot Guard Riders are concerned. 2 things. One is to kind of amend your statement about us being very responsible and pulling over or getting out of the way of a funeral procession. That happens in the rural areas of Kansas extremely well. People abide by it, or a military city like Leavenworth, Fort Scott, so on and so forth. The closer you get to the metropolitan areas, the worse it gets. After all, it's 2021, we're all in a hurry. And that's what we see on the highway as I'm on a motorcycle and I see people come buzzing by me. So, and all I'm trying to do is get this person escorted to a decent funeral to see them through the end of their life. The second thing I want to mention is that, I don't know if you recall, but there was a rider who was killed in western Kansas, and I believe it was 2019. They were escorting a person that had been killed in World War II, but they were escorting him up to Nebraska, and they went through a corner of Kansas. And it was a motorcycle rider that was killed. It was not one of my guys. It was an American Legion rider, but at any rate, just wanted to say that. And with that, I will stop. I am in complete support of the bill, and I hope you will consider it. If nothing else, it's a help to all of us here. And there's only about 1,300 of us in Kansas, so and we need all of them we can get. So at any rate, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate your service.
Any questions for me?
Committee, any questions? Senator Tyson.
Very quickly, thank you for your comments, and I am from rural Kansas, so that probably explains it. The issue I see is with ambulances, too. I wish we could amend the bill for ambulance also. Thank you.
Please state your name when you get to the microphone.
Name is Ron Wortley. I'm from Leavenworth, Kansas, and I'm very pleased to be here today. As someone who stands in support of our veterans, our law enforcement officers, and first responders as they come home to their final resting place, I stand in strong support of Senate Bill 131. I've been a proud member of the Patriot Guard Riders of Kansas since 2008, and I've ridden roughly 300 plus funeral missions. Based on my experiences as a ride captain, I have to tell you, there have been way too many instances of our riders having close calls when escorting a funeral procession. I've almost been broadsided by motor vehicles on at least 3 different occasions. This bill could do something to ensure the safety of those of us who are out there on a continual basis honoring our veterans during their funeral processions. While some may not realize the importance of recognizing funeral processions in statute, it is actually a small change that means a lot to citizens like me, especially in Leavenworth, Kansas, where we have 2 national cemeteries and several private cemeteries, where we proceed to on a regular basis, oftentimes without the benefit of law enforcement escort. Without that escort, our lives are put at more risk when we have to complete the escort on our own. I urge you all to consider early passage of this bill. It is extremely important for the safety and security of those of us who are out there on a daily basis honoring our veterans. Any questions?
Senator Tyson.
Thank you. I would just like to echo, thank you all for your service and everything you do for our state and our nation.
And I would like to also comment on your previous comment. By and large, the folks in Kansas, other than, as Bruce said, in the metropolitan areas, when I'm leading some procession in Leavenworth, you'd be surprised the number of people that pull over, get out of their car, either salute if they're prior military or put their hand over their heart. But there are those exceptions out there that we would like you to address so that we don't end up being in one of those processions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any neutrals wishing to testify? Any opponents? Close the hearing on Senate Bill 131. Turn our attention now to the hearing on Senate Bill 167. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 167 would classify certain public utility motor vehicles as authorized emergency vehicles. Section 1 includes motor vehicles operated by authorized persons of an electric or natural gas public utility to be included under the definition of authorized emergency vehicle. As a downstream result of this change, among other things, the authorized emergency vehicles are granted certain operational rights. There are also certain violations for the unlawful passing of a stopped authorized vehicle, the requiring drivers to yield to an authorized emergency vehicle, and also requiring pedestrians to yield to an authorized emergency vehicle, currently in statute. Section 2 would exempt these motor vehicles from being designated by a Board of County Commissioners as authorized emergency vehicles. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions for Adam? Seeing none, turn our attention to the first proponent, Senator Corson. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Peterson, Vice Chair Clays, Ranking Member Hawk, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of SB 167. I was motivated to introduce this straightforward worker safety measure after hearing from utility workers about the dangers and near misses that they face while doing their already difficult job on Kansas roadways. Indeed, other proponents will discuss an incident that happened right here in Topeka. As last week demonstrated, our utility workers braved the toughest conditions imaginable to keep on and restore our light and heat. Passing this legislation will provide these workers with a small measure of additional protection as they go about their already dangerous job. You have in your packet, and one thing I'm particularly proud of, is that this common sense legislation is supported by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Kansas City Board of Public Utilities, Kansas Electric Cooperatives, Evergy, Kansas Municipal Utilities, Black Hills Energy, Kansas Gas Service, Kansas Electric Power Cooperative, Sunflower Electric Power Corp., and Atmos Energy. Thank you so much for your consideration of this legislation, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee questions, Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Corson, how will I, as a driver, know that that's an emergency vehicle doing that type of repair?
That's a great question. So this is, so essentially what this legislation is trying to do is put Kansas in line with the 20 other states that recognize specifically utility vehicles in what's called these move over law. And so what that would do is require, if you see a vehicle stationary doing a repair during an emergency, it would have the flashing lights on. And so that would be how an oncoming motorist would see it. And then under Kansas's move over law, what they're required to do by statute would then be to, if they're able to change lanes into a lane that's not right next to where that emergency vehicle is pulled over. And if they're not able to, would be to reduce their speed and maintain a safe speed.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. So those vehicles must have flashing lights?
Right, correct. So these would be, think of the vehicles that you see doing the repairs on down power lines or other things of that nature. And they've generally got the two big lights in front, and those would be, what would be going is the visual signal to other motorists.
If they don't have the flashing lights going, then I, as a motor vehicle person, would not then recognize that as an emergency vehicle.
Correct. And again, this legislation is specific to not all the time would they be meeting this classification of being an emergency vehicle. It is only in that limited circumstance when these vehicles are being used to conduct emergency repairs on power or electrical lines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I will, again, just note that this is consistent with 20 other states, including Missouri and Nebraska, have taken a similar approach. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Senator, you wouldn't be opposed to having an amendment saying that adding on to that while operating with flashing lights?
I would welcome the input of other proponents, but I would not.
Okay, Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I heard you right, you just stated that this is only for under emergency situations, but I don't see that in the bill.
So if you look under, it's in Section 2 in C4. This is on page 2. It's lines 16 through 21. And specifically, if you look at the start of line 19, at the end of line 18, start of line 19, it says, when such motor vehicles are utilized for emergency repairs that are needed on electric utility or natural gas equipment to restore necessary services or ensure public safety. So that's how we tried to specifically get at this emergency situation.
Would you consider amending that to while under an emergency declaration? Because anything, I mean, who's going to, based on this language, it's pretty vague, are utilized for emergency repairs? I mean, that could be a one-block area.
Right, and I think that's, I would not support that because I think we want to give these utilities the flexibility of being able to go out at 2 or 3 in the morning and repair a down power line, repair electrical outages where there may not yet be and there may never be a state of emergency in place. The idea is to try to protect these folks when they're sent out, if, you know, even if it is limited to just my block or your block or any block, just to give them that extra measure of protection from oncoming vehicles and from other traffic.
I guess the question is, Mr. Chairman, who determines the emergency and what those emergency repairs in that area, who's determining that it's an emergency? That's my, I'm concerned about that. I mean, is this something the utility
Yeah.
just says, oh, we have an emergency over in Topeka right now, and it's, so we're all of a sudden supposed to understand that there's an emergency there?
Well, right, and the way we.
I'm just playing a little bit of the devil's
Oh.
advocate here. I'm just saying,
These are,
I think
these
that
are,
needs to be
these are
defined.
welcome questions. The way we did think about that, the way we tried to get at that exact question, which is a good one, was we put to restore necessary services or ensure public safety. So it would be service is out, they're trying to get service back on, or where there was some other public safety need. So we did contemplate that, and that's the language that we tried to address that concern with, which is a good one.
I'm just trying to figure out, I'm all for public safety and restoring services. I'm trying to figure out who's going to declare it an emergency, who's making that determination that it's an emergency.
Yeah, and again,
That's
I think
what my question is.
we would just say an outage would fall under this, an outage, or where there was a public safety issue. Obviously, if there was a downed line or something that you wouldn't want the general public to go near, and you're trying to get folks to cordon that off and repair that as soon as possible. Those would be the two main ones, restoration of service and some sort of a public hazard with respect to like a down line, for example.
Senator Cluse.
Thinking maybe along the lines of what Senator Powell was sharing, that often when there is an emergency, you're either dialing 911 or you're dialing that particular utility's emergency line. So I think if it's one or the other, that would probably constitute the emergency. That would enact an emergency, if maybe that helps.
Further, Senator Pittman.
Just one quick comment, and I appreciate that discussion. I think there might be some idea on the emergency piece, but just note that inside of the actual sections that wreckers, tow trucks, car carriers are also given this designation, presumably inside of the situation where they're on the side of the road. So, you know, there's probably some other areas where we would have a challenge with defining emergency on this, but I appreciate the point.
And to your point, Senator Pittman, the current law already covers police, firefighters, paramedics, wreckers, tow truck operators, and car carriers. So this would be just adding these utility vehicles in certain situations to that.
Thank you. Next up, we have David Galvin. Thank you, Senator. Welcome to the committee.
Chairman Peterson, Vice Chair Clays, Ranking Minority Member Hawk, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me time to be here today to testify in support of SB 167. My name is David Galvin, and I represent the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 304. We support SB 167 because it does add those utility vehicles engaged in the action of emergency repairs to electrical utility or natural gas equipment to that classification of emergency vehicles. Obviously, these men and women do a dangerous job day in and day out. There's one of 100 things that can go wrong and cause a tragedy, and that's when conditions are optimal. We believe that adding utility vehicles to the emergency vehicle classification will hopefully help to reduce a bit of the risk these important workers face and give them a greater sense of security as they do an already dangerous job in sometimes dangerous locations. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that most of our utility workers out there have at least one near-miss experience, if not more. You know, and it's unfortunate that we don't really get reports on those near misses, so we don't really know how close our workers come to being hurt and how often. We did have I believe it's also in Evergy's testimony that in broad daylight recently, last summer, up on North Lyman Road, a service vehicle was rear-ended by a distracted driver. Luckily, the service person was not hurt. As stated previously, we do currently have these move-over laws in Kansas that cover the police, firefighters, and paramedics, tow truck operators, and highway maintenance workers. And again, as previously stated, 20 other states, including Missouri and Nebraska, specifically include utility vehicles in their laws. We do believe that SB 167 is an important step in ensuring the safety of Kansas workers, and we're proud to support, along with Evergy, Kansas Gas, and the other utilities that have shown their support for this legislation. I thank the committee for its time today, and will stand for any questions you may have.
Committee questions? Seeing none, thank you. Turn our attention to the neutral opponents, or neutral conferees. Jay Hall. We have testimony. We'll accept that as written. It is in your packets. Committee, are there any opponents? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 167. Yes, Senator Pittman.
Adam, on this bill, when we designate an emergency vehicle, does that mean they can run through red lights? They can go as fast as they want? They can go through toll booths and that type of thing? I'm just curious if that's the full nature, or is it more of an emergency vehicle where we have to give proper kind of clearance when they're actually working on these things? Adam, are you there by chance?
Yes, I'm sorry. Sorry, yes. It's a good question. I was looking at that a little bit last night. Under 8-1506, there are the authorized emergency vehicle, their rights and duties, when they can, like you say, run or, follow cars, proceed through toll booths. I'd have to get back to you whether or not that would apply to all of them. I don't want to give you a wrong answer. And I'll have to look into that a little bit further.
We have one further last question for you, Adam. Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, driving up 81 Highway and back from Nebraska, I could have sworn that the sign says emergency and maintenance vehicles. Is there a separate designation for maintenance vehicles, or is that just the sign explaining all other vehicles that aren't with red flashy lights?
And are you referring to the move over component?
Yeah, there are move over signs that alert people to that law in the state of Kansas that are along our highways. And I could have sworn that they said emergency and maintenance vehicles.
I'll have to look into the maintenance component.
I'm happy to have Senator Corson address it too, if that's something you'd prefer he
Senator
address.
Corson, if you want to address it briefly, we need to adjourn. We are actually over time.
I'm very sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just briefly speak to Senator Pittman's question, and just to be clear that all this legislation attempts to do is really address the stationary vehicles that are on the side while they're attending to an emergency repair. This is not about having vehicles running through red lights or toll booths or not following traffic laws. This is really meant to be narrowly tailored just to apply to the move over law that Kansas currently already affords to all the other types of emergency vehicles that have been previously mentioned. So it's really those times where they're just stationary, repairing a down line.
Thank you, committee. We are out of time. We are adjourned.